The more information you can get, the more you can learn from people and not make the same mistakes they made, the further ahead you'll be.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 45 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
Hello and welcome to episode 9. If you've been listening to this podcast, I want to start the show by saying thank you and ask that if you're not already doing it, that you become a subscriber on iTunes. And if you haven't already done it, please consider giving us a rating and a review. This will really help drive more listeners to the show. Speaking of listeners to the show, I have noticed that we have listeners all the way from the United Kingdom, Portugal, Australia, Indonesia, and Nigeria. I find this very exciting to know that we now have an international audience to this show. And I really want to extend a thanks for listening. And I really hope that the information that you're getting out of the show is helping you in your country where you might be investing. So at the Rental Property Owner Association conference last month, I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of investors and rental property owners. And it really seems to me that there's a real interest in how to get started in this business. So today, I thought I would sit down with a good friend of mine, Rob Minch. And Rob is going to share his journey with us from owning his own mortgage company to becoming a full-time buy and hold rental property owner. Rob is going to tell us how he built his portfolio, property by property. He's going to share his story about the flip that went wrong. And he's also going to talk about techniques that he uses to find the best tenants and get the highest rents for his properties. You've been an investor for how long?
Since 2004.
2004. And take me back to 2004. What was going on in your life and what made you become an investor?
In 2004, I had a mortgage company with another partner. Witnessed a lot of real estate transactions through the years just through being a loan officer at a mortgage company, and just really decided that I saw enough people making money with real estate that it was my turn to get in. So at that point, I purchased a 4-unit in Heritage Hill, and that's where I began.
And this loan company, were you dealing with homeowners, investors? I mean, what was your niche?
Honestly, from investors to regular homeowners. But just I really paid attention to many of the investors and their portfolios and just found it highly interesting. And that's what really led me to begin investing in real estate.
Mm-hmm. And what did you notice? So what was it in particular that caught your eye and made you say, this is something I want to do?
They didn't have jobs per se, and they were collecting rent, and they seemed rather happy.
This is how they were making their living.
This is how they were
passive income.
Correct.
Okay, and how many properties would you say, if you can remember back that far, and the investors you were looking at, in order to have that kind of passive income where they didn't have jobs, how many properties would you say they owned?
I would say typically it would be like 10 and up at that time.
10 and up. Mm-hmm. Now, were these leverage properties, or did they own them free and clear at the time when they came to you?
You know, a lot of times they would be free and clear, and they would come to me to be able to leverage them to be able to purchase more cash-producing properties.
Mm-hmm. So they saw the opportunity to
Absolutely.
Take what they had, pull money out, and go buy more.
Correct.
Okay, and for a lot of those investors, and this was 2004, that must have been working out pretty well.
You know, it was going great because the values were just continuing to grow and allowing them, enough loan to value to be able to get the money they needed.
Let's talk about you then. You said this is something that I should be doing too. And what was the first step you took all the way up to the step where you actually purchased the property?
Well, really, the first step was establishing myself as being able to get a loan for a property. And then from there, once I knew that I was pre-qualified, then I began to target different neighborhoods and just look and see what I would feel comfortable with.
We're in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So a lot of what your investing experience took place here in Grand Rapids.
That's correct.
But it applies to any market around the country, give or take a few variables.
Oh, absolutely.
But let's talk about the areas that you were looking in. What type of property and what type of neighborhood did you decide upon?
Well, I really ultimately decided upon a neighborhood called Heritage Hill. It's here in Grand Rapids, a historic district. I really liked it because there were a lot of beautiful homes, and there were a lot of homes that needed some tender, loving care. And that's what I really looked at. I wanted a property that I could come in and put my own stamp on.
So what did you find? I mean, how many properties did you look at, and how many did you have to go through before you actually made an offer?
50.
50 properties.
Yeah.
And how many offers did you make on those?
Probably about 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And what at that time did you have return or cap rate, any of those things in mind when you were
Honestly,
looking?
I didn't know anything regarding that. I had briefly looked at it from my experience with a mortgage company, but not in depth the way I understand it today.
Mm-hmm. And since you were in the residential market, cap rate,
It really
return on investment.
It really didn't apply.
Didn't apply as far as getting a loan. So how did you decide what property made sense? What did you base that decision on?
Well, ultimately, I decided on a 4-unit, and essentially, for my first investment, I lived in one of the units. So as long as I could keep the other 3 units rented and actually still make a little money, it made sense. And then, through time, I fixed the property up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is the one. Okay, this is the one in the 4-unit in Heritage Hill. You were living in one side, starting in 2004 when
Correct.
you purchased it.
Yes.
And how did that work for you, being a not just a landlord and an owner, but someone who actually lived on the property?
Oh, it was a nightmare. It was scary. I didn't know anything about real estate. I didn't know anything about houses. My skill level was I was able to change a light bulb, so it was quite difficult. But through just will and perseverance, I was able to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. And did you do a lot of the fixing of toilets and
I did not
drywall and that kind of thing?
I did not. I found people that could help me do it, and then I would help them do it. As more me being the labor person and them being the skill.
What kind of advice would you give to someone in that position? Because I think that's a great way to get into real estate, is actually living, buying a duplex or a 3-unit or a 4-unit, living in one of the units and renting out the others to cover your mortgage. What advice would you give to someone who's thinking of doing that?
My advice would be is come up with a plan and don't be afraid. At the time when I did it, I didn't know anything regarding how to fix a property, how to lease a property. I didn't know a whole lot about real estate. I had a very limited knowledge. I simply knew that I saw people that were being successful, and I thought if they could do it, I could too. Mm-hmm. And just move forward.
And where did you go to get the information? Like for a lease, where did you get a lease from?
The greatest thing that happened to me is the realtor that I used to buy the property referred me to the RPOA, which is the Rental Property Owners Association here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And he said, all the resources you're going to need is going to be there, and I highly recommend that you go there and they'll help you out. And if it weren't for the RPOA, I wouldn't be where I'm at today, because they did teach me a number of things. Great.
Well, that's a great plug for the RPOA.
It's true, though. It is.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot from different owners and landlords, that the resources that they use come from the RPOA. So, What were some of the do you have any war stories from that period where you were living in the property with your tenants?
Well, you inherit tenants when you purchase a property sometimes. And, for me, I did inherit tenants, and I inherited tenants that did not pay their rent, that were not clean. I found out that the building had cockroaches, and I vacated the property, immediately had it, fumigated and taken care of. I mean, you run into all types of things, plumbing that breaks. There are all types of things that you encounter, and you just have to tackle them.
From that point, you own a 4-unit, you're living in one of the units, renting it out. I take it your cash flow was pretty good?
Yeah, it was good.
Mm-hmm. Covering your mortgage?
Yeah, I was making a few bucks.
So essentially you were living there for free?
I was being paid to live there.
You were being paid to live there?
Yes.
In your own property, and at the same time
That's correct.
Your tenants were paying down your mortgage?
Absolutely.
And you had enough money left over to maybe go out and buy a nice dinner for you and your wife.
You could say that.
Okay, great. So what was the next step? Did you say, okay, now I need to buy more of these, or what happened
No,
next?
honestly, my wife became pregnant and we purchased a property in the country, and I had thought about actually selling the property. And then later is when I actually decided to buy more properties. But I wouldn't say it was a right away thing. I wouldn't say at first I fell in love with real estate. It took time.
Well, I suppose there's an initial shock of owning your first property and being the one who has to manage it, and just getting your bearings doing that.
It's a profound shock.
Profound. So timing is everything.
It
and you
is.
say buying more properties didn't come till later. So keeping in mind that 2007, 2008, the bottom fell out from underneath the market. When did you actually buy your second property?
The next one I bought was a single family home in Caledonia, and I completely went through that property. That was in 2009.
2009, okay. So you must have got it for a good price then.
I did.
Describe the neighborhood.
It was rural. The property was on a couple acres. It had been very neglected. I bought it out of foreclosure. I had to completely, essentially gut the whole property and go through the whole thing. And what I did is I fixed it. I made it a little profit. Honestly, I didn't make that much money, but at least I had made some money. But what I did gain was a wealth of knowledge through renovating that property completely. From that point is when I went on and began to really build my real estate portfolio.
Okay, before you get into that, so if I understand, the Caledonia property was really a fix and flip.
It was.
So, and what made you think, well, maybe that's a strategy I want to try, is the fix and flip?
Honestly, at that time, I was watching a lot of A&E flip this house, and, you see, a number of people on TV, and you're like, wow, why not? So I thought, hey, I'll try it.
So what was the real experience like compared to what you see on A&E?
What you see on TV is not true.
What do you mean it's not true?
They only show the good parts. Things go wrong, and you can anticipate that you're going to spend X amount of dollars on this property, and this is that. But the truth be told, when you get into it, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. And this was not one of the good ones.
So if you don't mind, let's talk about the numbers. I mean, do you remember the ballpark numbers of what you paid, what you had estimated it would cost?
Yeah.
Do you mind talking about that?
Sure. No, I bought the property. I paid $35,000 for the property. I had anticipated I was going to spend about $50,000 on it, and I thought I could sell
50 above and beyond the
correct.
price. Okay.
I thought I would be into it for about $85,000, and I anticipated I could probably sell it for about $160,000 was what I had thought.
$160,000.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
The truth of the matter is that I had ended up putting probably about $70,000 into it, and I was only able to sell it for right around $130,000, and that was before all the closing costs. And I had to, I had to put a new sewer in that I didn't anticipate that came through inspections, and that ate into my profit.
A new sewer? So you had to dig up the ground?
Yes.
Underneath the house? Underneath the foundation?
Next to the house.
Okay. That can add quite a bit to your bill.
Yes, it can.
You ended up putting 70 in. You paid 35 for it, so you're into it for 105. You say you sold it for how much? 130?
130.
So that's $25,000 spread, but then with closing costs, that's probably an additional $10,000 if you had a broker. So you walked away with about $15,000.
I'd say it was about 12.
About $12,000. And how much time and effort did you put into that?
6 months.
6 months full time, or
more or less. I mean, I had a general on the job that pretty much answered to me and let me know what was going on. But still, I was mentally vested in the property and spending a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. So and then of course the government takes their bite. So if you walk away with $12,000, and your tax rate is, I don't know what your tax rate is, but let's say it's somewhere between 25 to 30%. That means you're really walking away with about $8,000.
I made very little.
After about 6 months worth of work. But you learned a lot.
I did.
So it's like going to school and getting paid a little bit to
essentially.
do so. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I like talking about the numbers in a realistic way, so the people out there who are thinking of doing the same thing understand, all right, sometimes you have unanticipated expenses like a sewer that needs to be replaced. You remember what that cost you?
I want to say it was about $6,000.
So that right there, that's $6,000. That's a good chunk of your profit.
Absolutely.
That's $6,000 that does not go into your pocket at the end of the day.
For sure.
So lessons learned. What were the lessons you learned from that, and what was the decision you made from that point forward?
House flipping was not for me, and it's not to say, again, that I did not learn a lot. However, I looked back at the 4-unit, which I still retained at that time, and they just continued to pay me monthly, and I thought more and more that was the strategy I needed to utilize.
So what was your next step then? What did you decide to do?
Talking to a lot of realtors in the area and just letting them know that I was out and actively looking, and that it would be a quick, fast close and very easy for them. And
Is that because you had cash on hand? Or
yes, correct.
You were pre-authorized for a mortgage?
I had cash on hand.
So you were a cash buyer?
Yes.
At that point, okay. Good. So brokers appreciate a cash buyer, obviously.
They did, very much so.
Especially during that period when
absolutely. And this
loans were
was
hard to come by.
this was late 2009, early 2010.
So what'd you buy? What would you find?
The first one I got was just a little single family, a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. It's been a great property for me, honestly. It's one of my best cash producing properties.
Mm-hmm. And is this in Grand Rapids, Heritage Hill?
It is actually in the Midtown neighborhood of Grand Rapids,
Okay,
which is adjacent to Heritage Hill.
All right, and then for those who don't know, the Midtown area would be kind of just outside the historic district, but close enough to downtown and neighborhood shops and whatever that it's a desirable place, especially for students.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Great. So single family. How much work did you have to put into that?
Very little. I purchased the property for $21,000. I want to say I put less than $4,000 into it.
Okay, that's
Total.
So you're into it for about $25,000. You own it free and clear still.
Correct.
3-bedroom, 1-bath. Rents, I would imagine, are probably $900. Or am I way off?
I get $1,325 per month.
Wow, that's good. That's good.
I like it.
Yeah, that's the road to riches right there, is having that kind of passive cash flow. And I'd like to just talk about that for a moment, because I know you come from a mortgage
Loan officer
background, so you've seen it both ways: people who leverage their properties. People who leverage their properties and have gotten in trouble because they've had too much leverage, and then people who own free and clear. Talk a little bit about your philosophy as far as that's concerned.
I agree honestly with all the different philosophies. For me personally, I like to try to pay them in cash if I can, but definitely it's a great strategy to leverage them. Obviously, if the numbers work.
What kind of problems as a loan officer and just as an investor over the years, and obviously you were buying some of these properties, what kind of problems did you see people who use leverage get into?
You would see them not doing their homework, so to speak, and not investigating the property and seeing what it really was going to entail to get it where they wanted it to be. And they didn't have a goal in mind in regards to first of all, what the property was going to cost to update if it needed to be updated, and then what type of resident they were going to have, what it was going to rent for. They just, I would call it a bit of the Wild West at that time in mortgages, that people just saw people buying real estate and they wanted to buy it also without really doing their homework and investigating and making sure it was a good, sound investment, is why I saw a lot of the defaults happen.
Yeah, lenders were looking to lend to anybody who
had a
heartbeat, and a lot of those people did not know what they were doing, and basically took out loans that were on properties that could not support the repayment of those loans. And that's in the residential, and you were dealing mostly in the residential,
correct?
Right? You were not in the commercial lending.
I did like commercial, but primarily it was residential.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And even still today with residential properties, residential rental properties, lenders don't really look at the income as much, do they?
They're more concerned with the strength of the person's credit in their history than they are the property, correct?
Right. They're looking at you, the buyer.
Absolutely.
As the guarantor on the loan. not necessarily at the property.
Yeah, they do it a bit backwards.
Well, once you get into the commercial world, which is 5 units or more, then you're dealing with lenders who are looking at the property and the numbers and whether or not
A lot more
the numbers
common
can
sense,
support
in
it.
my opinion.
Yeah, that sounds like you had a great deal. A single family that you bought for $21,000, put about $4,000 into it. You own it free and clear. You get a nice rent income from that every month. Before we move on to your next deal, talk about, even with a deal that sounds that good, there's still other costs that have to be taken into consideration. I mean, it's not like you're just sitting back collecting that rent and it's all going straight into your pocket. Let's talk about some of the real world costs that you've encountered, specifically with that property over the years.
Actually, one thing that I found very interesting is that in the city of Grand Rapids, obviously the property was owned, it was in foreclosure, there was a previous resident that had lived there. There was a water bill that was not paid. And I inherited that bill by way of purchasing the property, which I was completely unaware of. And I didn't realize that, that became my baby, that I had to take care of that and pay that.
Really?
After a lengthy, let's call it discussion with the city, I ended up paying it. But these types of things happen.
So how much was that? How much did they nail you for?
Oh, about $220. But, and it's not that it was that much money, but it was more the principle why I was quite upset.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's hidden costs like that, on things that you just don't expect, and unless you really dig into them before you buy, which can be difficult in a foreclosure situation.
It can, and I would highly recommend that you are very careful in whichever city or state you live in, and you make sure that you're contacting all of the water departments or the title company. Make sure you're checking all liens to make sure that you're very careful and making sure that there are no liens there that you're not going to have to inherit.
Mm-hmm. And do you use an attorney when you buy to check those things for you?
A title company, typically.
Title company takes care of that for you?
One that I've worked with for years.
Mm-hmm. What about some of the ongoing costs? Because one thing that I think a lot of investors don't necessarily take into consideration, especially with the older properties, is just the upkeep on those properties. So just talk about the upkeep that you've had, either on your 4-unit or the single family or some of the other properties.
Well, a lot of these properties were built in the late 1800s or early 1900s here in Grand Rapids that I've dealt with. And, you've got a hodgepodge of different types of plumbing. And I've had many times when I've had plumbing issues because pipes have clogged or, they've bent and, you've got to get into the drywall. All of a sudden the tenant calls you and, the water's not draining properly and you send the plumber there and the plumber snakes it out and cleans it and it's still not going. So you've got to tear in the walls. And these are just things that you cannot anticipate. But you should definitely anticipate them because they will happen.
Mm-hmm. What would you budget if you were talking to someone who was looking to buy a property? What would you tell them they should budget for these? Because you've got
unforeseen.
Well, because there's two things really. You've got maintenance and repairs, okay, which would be cover the plumbing and opening up drywall and that. But then you also have capital expenses, which would include things like replacing a roof or windows or some of the physical aspects of the property that every 10 to 20 years need to be replaced.
I would say, you've really got to look at your asset, the property itself, and see what type of condition it is. And then, based off the inspection you've had, and consult that person and really, first of all, see what condition the property is in. And then from there, you determine what you're going to budget in regards to capital improvement and also for maintenance. I don't want to say a specific number, but I would say that you should take it very seriously and make sure that you understand your property and that you're budgeting correctly based on the condition of your property.
So actually, rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to budget
a flat fee,
$2,000 a year, I'm going to go through and kind of inspect before I buy and say, all right, the refrigerator needs to be replaced, so that's $400 right there. The roof needs to be replaced in 5 years, so that's going to be $6,000 to $10,000 that I'll have to spend. Really. So you break it down into more of an itemized list.
I do, and I'm really trying to itemize it exactly as you just said, and make sure that I'm being as accurate as I possibly can. Do things come up? They do, but you try to do your homework the best you can.
Mm-hmm. And what about just like repairs and maintenance? Because plumbing issues, you can't really be as specific. You can just sort of assume I'm going to have, like, for example, I always budget. On a smaller property, I would budget probably 10% of the rent, 10 to 15% of the rents toward maintenance and repairs, especially on the older properties. It might be 15 or a little bit higher. But other people have different formulas. So I'm wondering if you have a formula that you use.
A formula per se? No, honestly, just I'm going to go into each and every property and I'm going to look at it as an individual. Your 10 to 15% is pretty fair. Mm-hmm. That's a good number.
Yeah. And I would say that's on the smaller properties. So if it's 2 to 6 units, I would probably budget 10 to 15% of the rent. Once you get to the larger apartments, then you're going by door. So you might budget anywhere from $250 to $500 a door, depending on the condition of the property. And that would just be for maintenance and repairs. The capital expenses would be a separate thing.
I would say this. I would definitely over budget. And at the end of the year, if there's something left over, that's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You over budget and hope that it comes in well below.
Exactly.
But at least you have the money set aside. And I think that's key. I think that's very important for people who run their real estate as a business, that you don't get too rosy with your projections, and that you do over budget and make sure that you have reserves to cover these things when they happen, because crucial. They always happen.
It's crucial.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about some of the other properties. So 2009, you buy the single family, great bargain. I mean, it sounds like you got a great deal. What next? What did you look at next?
My next one that I bought was a 2-unit in Heritage Hill. I bought it for $29,000. It was a great deal at that time. I had a significant investment in that. I wouldn't say that was as good a deal as what the single family was, but it was still a very good deal. Let me think, what did I have to put into that one? Probably around $60,000 invested on top of the purchase price.
Okay, so you had a good $90,000 into that property.
Yeah, correct.
Mm-hmm. And how's that working out for you?
It's working well. That currently gives me $1,775 per month.
Nice. So that's I'm sure that's more than paid off by now.
It is.
Yeah. So you and I were both buying in 2009, 2010. I mean, that was acquisition mode time for both of us.
That's when we first met.
That's right. Yeah. I actually almost bought your 4-unit from you. Well, I looked at your 4-unit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so you and I would see each other at some of these properties that we were both looking to acquire. Great time. I mean, how would you compare and contrast 2009, 2010 with the market today?
The market goes in cycles. We're in a cycle now where the values are up, and then it was down due to everything that had happened.
When I look at the cycles in 2009, 2010, you could find a lot of really good deals, but financing those deals was very difficult unless you came in with cash, or you had a loan with probably a little higher interest rate and a much larger down payment. It was very hard to actually acquire those properties.
Absolutely.
Today, it's a lot easier to get the loans. Not as easy as it might have been in 2004 because the banks are still very cautious.
I mean, the financing options are very good from my understanding. I wouldn't say as good as what they were in 2004, but they're much better than they've been in, a number of years. The deals are not so much out there anymore. You're really going to have to dig and find and, really do your homework to, get an investment you're comfortable with. But again, it is all about your comfort level and what you personally find as an investor to be an acceptable return.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that. What is an acceptable return? I mean, when you look at when you were looking at deals back in 2009, 2010, what kind of return was acceptable to you then, as opposed to what kind of returns you're seeing now in the market?
Well, then, I mean, an acceptable return to me was 20 to 25%.
25% cash on cash, like every year return on investment type return.
Yes.
20, yeah, which was achievable.
It was very achievable.
What are you noticing now in the market?
Well, I mean, the thing is, the market's caught up to itself, just as it's always done. And, today, if you could get a 7 to 12% return, obviously, depending on the type of asset in the neighborhood, but I would say that's a good sound investment. Brian, the thing I like about real estate is it's a tangible asset, and I can drive by it and I can look at it and it's there. That's why I like real estate. It's not just something that I watch on TV.
Yeah. You can actually do it and get involved. And you are a hands-on owner. You actually manage your own properties.
I do.
So let's talk about that. I mean, what is it? As the landlord or manager of your properties, what do you appreciate about being that person? And why is it you choose to do that as opposed to go the route where you would hire a management company?
I grew up in a family business, and I've always worked for myself primarily. For me, personally, it was good to learn the business and know it from the inside out. Now, I will be transitioning, I believe, in the near future, I would say a year to two, that I ultimately will have my properties all managed by a property manager. But I'm very glad I did it the way I did, because I could learn every in and out of the business and know how to deal with a property manager and manage the manager. So, really, I had no real estate background, so to speak of.
Did your dad own rental property as well?
He did. He had a couple single-family homes, which he mismanaged because he never learned how to manage them properly.
Really? And talk about that, because it's interesting to, you obviously do it right. I've seen how you manage your properties. You do a very good job, and
thank you.
There's a system that you have, and you make sure that you get the best type of tenants. But I'd like to hear your perspective on what your dad was doing wrong to get the contrast.
He would take the first person that would go there that wanted the place, whether they had the correct deposit, whether they could pay the correct rent. He would always listen to their sob story. He would sometimes allow them not to pay rent for a month. He did everything the way you shouldn't do it.
And how did that turn out for him?
He hated real estate. He always told me, I remember, before I bought my 4-unit, he told me, he's like, I don't know why you're going to do this. He's like, you're just walking into headaches. He's like, you don't want to do this. But the thing he didn't understand, he didn't do it right.
And so you're like, I'll show you. I'm going to do it right. What did that mean? I mean, break that down into how you did do it right and the differences between your style and his style.
Simply doing my homework and taking it serious, and just running all the numbers, and then also, there's a lot of things you could go in depth, but I mean, you look at the demographics of the area, you look at who you want to live in your property, what type of resident are you targeting, and obviously non-payment of rent is not acceptable. It was not a matter of showing them up. I simply wanted to be successful at it.
Right. So I know one of your strategies is to buy properties in nicer neighborhoods, so that and then market them to tenants who can afford higher rents, and that seems to have helped prevent a lot of problems right there.
Absolutely, and I bought a number of properties out of foreclosure or out of from owners that have owned them for a number of years, and just they didn't care anymore. They lost interest in it, and for me, I was more interested in the area and also knowing who my target resident was going to be and what that target resident was willing to pay for a good place to live.
What tips do you have out there for other landlords who are listening to this, or people who are thinking of buying and managing their own properties? And
best tip I can give is join your local rental property owners association, whatever, RIA you can get into. And, when they have meetings, go to those meetings and look at the people that are successful and sit and pick their brain and talk to them and say, if you were getting started today, what would you do? How would you get started? Mm-hmm. And just really do your homework and just, the more information you can get, the more you can learn from people and not make the same mistakes they made, the further ahead you'll be.
Exactly. So, and I know we touched on this earlier in this interview, but let's talk about the RPOA for a second. And just like, what are some of the resources that you use from the RPOA and how have they helped you?
Well, as being a member, you've got access to all their forms, their documents, the asset of having the employees that work there that can give you the correct legal advice. And if they don't know, you've got access to the RPOA's attorney, in limited phone call with him, and just getting the correct information and doing it right so that you're not making the mistakes that cost you money and are not counterproductive from your success.
Mm-hmm. Do you use any of their online resources, like go to their website and look up tenants to see if they've had problems at other properties?
I do. Mm-hmm. I absolutely do.
Has that saved you any headache? Like, have you seen anybody on there?
I have absolutely. I have a story is that I had someone that came. They were a younger person and they had a parent that was willing to co-sign. They wanted to move in. It looked like a really good deal to me. But after referencing the list at the RPOA and then actually speaking with the landlord, because he was someone that I knew, and he told me basically the horror story he had with that resident, and run away as fast as you can, essentially. And I'm very grateful that I did my homework and I looked, because I could have got myself into something that would have cost me money. And the whole goal is to make money, not to cost yourself money.
Exactly. That's worth the price of membership right there, is avoiding a tenant who could have cost you a lot more.
Being a member of the RPOA is priceless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about horror stories. So, because I love, this is a nuts and bolts kind of podcast. So I like to talk about the good and the bad. And I'm wondering if you have any horror stories of whether it be tenants or property problems. What do you got for me?
Last winter, it was very cold here in Michigan, Western Michigan, and I had a resident, longtime resident, had lived there for over 4 leases, and his girlfriend went to go do laundry. And all my residents at this property had a key to be able to get in the basement to do laundry. And he gave the key to her. Well, on the night that it was 10 degrees below zero, she left the door open in the basement.
Oh, the door to the outside.
Correct.
Okay.
So I got a call that Sunday morning at about 8 a.m. From one of my residents, and he told me that his pipes were frozen and he wasn't getting water. So I went there and I checked it out, and sure enough, the door had been left open and all kinds of pipes had been frozen and were starting to burst, and had to call in a favor to get the water shut off on a Sunday, and then from there get a plumber in. And
of course, these things always happen on a Sunday, or in the middle of the night.
It's very clear in my mind, and it was definitively at that time. It'll happen at the most unopportune time. Mm-hmm. At least from my experience. And spent a number of hours there with the plumber, and had a huge bill. Even the next year it created damage where actually the pipe below the meter, they had to dig into the ground and fix that. So, I have, a considerable amount of money invested in that mistake that it should not have happened.
All right. So what did you say to the tenant? How did you get any recompense for that?
Obviously you have their security deposit, but you can go after them in small claims. Without getting in too much, it was just a nightmare. And sometimes you cannot always control things.
Yeah.
Let me just say this. For a number of years, every resident in Grand Rapids will probably not lease to him. or excuse me, every landlord will not lease to him.
Really? So his name is on the list now, huh?
That could be.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you do? What do you do then to prevent that from happening in the future? I mean, what changes could you have made?
The change that I did made is I actually made my own form for the lease stating that anyone that lives in that home, only the specific leaseholder is allowed to access that room and do laundry. And I make them sign it. Even though I have personally, verbally conveyed it, it's a little different when you put it in writing and then you also give them a copy.
And would that have made a difference?
Perhaps. I'm not sure. All it is really a preventative type of maintenance, so to speak.
Yeah. It certainly brings it to their attention a little bit more. And that was, how dumb do you have to be to leave the door open to the basement in the middle of winter?
I don't want to tell you how many times I've asked myself that question.
Yes, well, I think we know the answer to that. So
We do.
How about a positive story? I mean, like the opposite, big win.
Positive is that, personally, I go through and I design all my units. I'm not a person who buys a property and it's all done necessarily. I would, but I've always gone through and I've always fixed them and designed them myself. And a positive, I would say, is just seeing a really nice resident that's very happy and truly appreciates the place that I've provided for them. And, they're happy and, they continue to live there for years. And
so they like what you create.
Exactly.
So talk about that a little bit, because I know when you've done some we didn't talk about all your properties, but I know you've bought some other duplexes and I don't know if you had some additional single families, but I know you go through and you kind of pick the finishes. You like granite countertops, you like some of the higher end cabinets and that. Tell me about those choices and what they mean to your tenant and what they mean to the rent.
I do. When I go through a property, I make sure that I maximize what I can in the property, make it as nice as I possibly can, go through with a good solid design, give it granite countertops, give it a nice undermount sink if it's warranted, stainless steel appliances. I really try to make a very high-end place for people to live. And the reason I do that is because I'm wanting to deal with a higher echelon type of resident. First of all, they're willing to pay more. And secondly, they're going to leave my property in very good condition. And typically it's the type of person that I can have a conversation with in regards to if there's an issue with the property, they're going to let me know right away so I can get in there and take care of it promptly. So a win-win. I'm making a good property for them that they're very happy and that they truly enjoy in a nice neighborhood, and I'm collecting a premium rent.
Nice. And we've definitely seen, from 2009 when we were both in acquisition mode, there was always that question, well, what's going to happen to this neighborhood? What's the trend in Grand Rapids for that matter? And what have you seen just in the areas you've purchased in, and what's happening in those areas?
Just continued to get better. If you look at Western Michigan and Grand Rapids specifically, we've had so much investment over the last 5 or 6 years. The market is so underserved. There's, I believe right now, a 98% occupancy rate in the city of Grand Rapids. So much investment, and not only Heritage Hill really cannot be touched because it's a historic district. It just continues to be a very nice neighborhood. But the surrounding areas, such as Midtown, East Hills, Cherry Hill, Easttown, there's been a lot of investment and bringing a lot of good things to the city, and it just helps improve the neighborhoods in the city as a whole.
Yeah, and so what kind of tenants do you typically get? Because I know you're getting tenants who can pay a higher rent. Where are those tenants coming from?
Some of them come from Western Michigan. Some of them are transfers from out of state. Typically, it's going to be a young professional who could probably definitely own their own home if they wanted to, but they simply don't want the maintenance and want to live in that particular neighborhood and live that particular lifestyle. I have from teachers to business owners, administrators, hospital employees. I mean, I would say for me, most of my residents they're probably all college graduates, and they probably all have master's degrees.
Let's wrap this up a little bit by just talking about what you see for the future. What trends do you see coming up? What warning signs do you see? And what positive signs do you see?
Well, Grand Rapids, is continuing to grow. And if you look at the country as a whole, Grand Rapids is a shining light, and people want to come here and live here. It's a nice place to live. The future, just continue to keep your finger on the pulse and just pay attention to the markets, and, not only here in Western Michigan, but in the world, and just follow things. That's all I do. And just try to keep my finger on the pulse and, act accordingly.
Anything that concerns you that you see happening right now in the market?
Not particularly, other than, I still see people that overpay for properties and then put themselves in a bad position.
Mm-hmm. So are you seeing that now? I mean, are you seeing some of the properties that are on the market going for higher than what you think they should go for?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for people who are looking?
Do your homework, get with people that have done it, and come up with a good plan. And then within that plan, don't deviate. Don't fall in love with the property. Fall in love with the numbers.
Yeah, let the numbers guide you. And know what those numbers are going to be, because a lot of people may think they know what those numbers are, but they change, especially taxes.
Talk to a seasoned veteran.
Where would you recommend people go? I mean, obviously the RPOA is a great resource. Where else can people new to investing in this area go to talk to seasoned veterans?
There is I don't know if you call it a dinner. It's more informal. I want to say it's at the BW3 in Granville, or is it Wyoming?
Wyoming.
Okay.
The Buffalo Wild Wings.
Yep, Buffalo Wild Wings over on 44th Street.
It's a meetup group. Well, I came to it through Meetup, the meetup.com, but it's the REI who sponsors it, right?
I believe so.
Mm-hmm. But RPOA is also a sponsor of it.
They are involved for sure.
Yes. So that's a good place to go.
That's one good place where you can go and talk to a lot of people, get a lot of good information. And then also on Friday mornings, the RPOA sponsors a breakfast on Plainfield, just north of Ann Street. And on Friday mornings from 8 until probably 9:30 or 10, they have a great networking breakfast. You meet a lot of good people that have a lot of experience.
That was a place where I met you and a number of other people. So it's a great place to go and get good information, meet good people, and
absolutely
other like-minded people who are either currently investing, own properties, or looking to invest.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, guys, I went there. I didn't know anything. I was scared. All these people, I didn't know anything about real estate. They're the most friendly group of people. And honestly, all they want to do is help you succeed.
Great. And I think that's a great place to stop. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much, Rob.
Yeah, thank you.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.